Justin A.W. Blair here with another YouTube video about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the novel Devil in the Sky, number 11, and perhaps, sadly, my friends, perhaps the last Deep Space Nine novel in the numbered series that I am going to bother reading. I have to say that I reached some sort of Zen state of no mind while reading no mind. It passed me by like a rippling brook in nature. Nothing really stuck with me. Feels like I didn't exist there. And now that brings us to something about most of these books in the Deep Space Nine series. They are very, what is the right word I'd like to use here? There is a certain comfort in knowing how things are going to end up. I think that is part of the enjoyment of the Star Trek series. Not a lot of big changes going to happen. You know the structure, you know what's going to happen, and this book pretty much follows that. So I'll lay it out for you. I tell you right now, don't really recommend picking this up unless for some reason you're doing what I'm doing and just going through and kind of reading all these books. And I may still do it. I'm not going to lie to you, friends. I have 5 more in the eBay cart, but I haven't pulled the trigger on those because part of me does want to give it a rest. These books in general are just not really up to the standards that I would expect. However, mildly enjoyable. Old Greg Cox and John Gregory Bittencourt, the authors on this one. Not bad writers. It was actually, up there in the middle range, maybe even a little better than average. How some of these are written. Basically, what you have is a situation. We have a situation on board Deep Space Nine in this book. Spoilers incoming. Hortas. Remember Hortas from the first Star Trek series? Well, they play a huge part in this book. If you don't remember, the Hortas are the rock-eating beasts, sentient beasts that live on a world, and Spock, I think, ends up. They don't know. Kirk and Spock, they go to this mining world, and they're like, all of our people are getting eaten by something. We don't know. They're dying. There's a massacre of miners, and Kirk and Spock, for some reason, are the ones that go there to try to figure it out. They figure it out. These tunnels, there's these creatures that are tunneling through using acid to dissolve rock. Spock mind melds with an injured one. The rest is history, and I suppose I didn't expect to see them come back. It's kind of a creature feature standalone episode from the 1960s of the original series, but they were resurrected for this book. Well, you can imagine what happens. Basically, Deep Space Nine is taking in a package of a mother Horta with 20 some odd eggs. And they're doing this mission where Bajor needs some help mining. And so the Horta are going to go down there and help them mine some areas. Now, this brings me to one of my observations about Star Trek in general, which is that despite the fact that we have spacefaring races all throughout the galaxy which use faster than light travel, transporters, replicators, all manners of technology, mining tech really has not seemed to have caught up with these people in the galaxy. Mining, as you will note, a Star Trek fan, really does not seem to have caught up. You get a lot of hands-on work with the mining, and mining is also something that is apparently always something that the bad guys do. They use the prison labor for their mining camps, sometimes inexplicably. Sometimes they might give some sort of reason, like it's hard to get to. It just strikes me as a little odd that we have this far future science fiction world in which we have so much technology and yet people are still using hammers and picks. Now, what ends up happening here is the Horta, Mother Horta, gets stolen by some Cardassians. Kira and Bashir fly off to try to rescue that Horta, while the eggs stay in Deep Space Nine. Now, this brings me to another part of this. You know, you know what's going on here, right? You got a bunch of creatures that can secrete acid that dissolves not only people but metals and rock. And the security situation here real lax on Deep Space Nine apparently, because they're just kind of kept in this behind a small force field, and guess who comes along? Old Nog and Jake getting into trouble again. Well, their hijinks almost destroy the station. In fact, it does destroy a great deal of the station. I mean, it's not even hijinks, so it's another thing that's kind of weird about this. I mean, Nog is just a blatant thief and is stealing children, basically, to sell them. So that's not great. And, oftentimes the thing that goes on with Jake and Nog is a little more innocent. This just seems like blatant theft, and Jake goes along with it. So there's that. So what ends up happening, of course, is the eggs hatch. They forget, because they're stupid, to put the force field back up after they steal one of them. And now you have all these little Hortas running around, spraying acid everywhere, and they begin to dissolve the station. They head towards more and more important parts of the station. And it's just, look, this is actually really boring, because once that happens, you know what's going to happen, and it does. O'Brien runs around trying to fix everything. There's a lot of things that don't make sense to me about any of this. First, obviously, this is a hazmat situation. You shouldn't have those things like unprotected where they can just be stolen by the youth. And also, they can cause a lot of damage. But beyond that, it's not really clear to me why they can't just beam them into space, because I assume they don't breathe oxygen since they live in rock or whatever, basically. But maybe that's not a possibility. Like, they don't like it. They don't like zero gravity. I understand that. But so they don't do that. But of course, then there's this other thing that's coming along in the book, which is there's this moon of Bajor that's very little known, but it's coming into close proximity to the station. Well, then inexplicably also, Cisco contacts the surface and the government, the provisional government. It's all crazy. And so now all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we don't want the Hortas. That doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, like, you asked for these things to be brought across space, and now suddenly someone's just like, no, we don't want them. You can't beam them down here. That doesn't make sense. It's just bad plotting, really. Just so you have to keep them on the station. There are a lot of things that don't really make sense to me about this book, and they're not explained, and they just keeps on going on. I mean, it's just, the main A plot is that basically O'Brien running around trying to, not kill the Hortas, which, that's nice. I don't think you should do that. On the other hand, they are melting your station, destroying all your weaponry, and they're heading towards the core, and they're going to blow up the station. So I don't know. I mean, tough call, but that tough call is never really characterized here in the book. So then we're over here, and Kira is acting like a badass, because that's what she always does. She's gonna save the Horta, kind of. They're not really doing that great. Her and Bashir's like, I'm just a youthful doctor. I don't know. No one really likes me, and that is something that really suffered in these novels, because so many of them were written pretty early on, where Bashir was more annoying as a character on the television show, and that characterization was brought into almost all these books. Well, lo and behold, they find this Cardassian moon or whatever where the Horta has been stolen. The mother Horta has been stolen. But then also they find a bunch of prison camp Bajorans that have been kept by the Cardassians, and they're tortured by a lot of things, but they're kept alive apparently just for funsies, to mine rocks, but it's not really that useful, and it's just like, we do it because we hate Bajorans. It doesn't really make sense. Again, like, you have a spacefaring race, the Cardassians, and, I don't really know if they would waste their time keeping a bunch of prisoners alive, mining rocks just because they're mad at them. But that's what we see in Star Trek a lot. We get a lot of forced labor, bad guys doing forced labor, basically. So it seems to me if the Cardassians were really that evil, they would have just killed them all. But no, they don't do that. They keep them there and torture them by making them work in a mine. I don't have anything else to say about that. That is what it is. It is a trope too often used in Star Trek, if you ask me, and not very believable. That is about all I have. I didn't even take really notes when I read this because there was just nothing there. There was nothing there. Nothing there. I jotted down some hasty notes here, and I can't read my own handwriting. What does this say? Shitty security procedures. We covered that already. Why would Cardassians waste time forcing people to break rocks? We covered that. So that's pretty much it. We're going to do a short one. You know, like I said, it was actually written fairly well. The prose itself, good pacing, all that was fine. Just the plot itself just didn't move me, didn't go anywhere. No surprises. Kira and Bashir basically kill a bunch of Cardassians, even though they're like, maybe we don't kill them, we stun them, but then they get killed anyway. There is, within these novels, again, we've talked about this before, a bit of a kind of problem with the traditional Star Trek thing of phasers on stun, we try not to kill people. And then in the books, a lot of times you'll have that, but also you'll just have these sudden outbursts of violence that occurs with the Cardassians. You know, it is what it is. I didn't really know why Odo's face is on there. Odo doesn't play a big part in this. It's very odd also with the artwork on these books. The book covers, oftentimes they'll have artwork of a character that wasn't primary to the story. And Odo really isn't. Quark doesn't figure in much either, which is unfortunate. Like, subscribe, leave me your comments. Have you read Devil in the Sky back in 1990, whenever it was published? Have you read it recently? Am I engaged in anti-Horta propaganda? I'm not against them. I'm glad they're around. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me why they're a sentient life form that just lives in rocks. I mean, okay, I guess. But I mean, they're really afraid of space, but they're also like, okay, we can take us to a random moon somewhere and we'll do stuff. I don't know. Maybe we need more Horta lore. Maybe we don't. Till next time, Justin A.W. Blair.